Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is April the 30th, 2024. It has been 3,746 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 70 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 67 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened on Monday and Tuesday morning. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. The RAM-up updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. There are only minor changes from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, you won't hurt my feelings. I won't even know. 1. Our assessment that Russian forces would continue to intensify their ground attacks before significant aid from the US, the Czech Republic-led Ammunition Initiative, Belgium, the European Union and the United Kingdom arrive in Ukraine was accurate, with Russian forces carrying out another 93 attacks on Monday. 2. We maintain that enough aid to have a material impact on stabilizing Ukrainian ground and air defenses will be in the theater of war within 3 to 5 weeks. 3. Ukrainian forces continue to have insufficient ammunition resources, particularly short-range air defense systems, which enable the holding of existing defensive lines and protect the civilian population. 4. The world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox, with renewed nuclear threats by Kremlin leadership and Polish leadership openly discussing forward deploying United States nuclear weapons. 5. In our assessment, Russian forces achieving their operational goal of capturing Chasiv Yar by May the 9th is unlikely, but efforts to capture the strategically important settlement, regardless of cost, will continue. 6. We maintain that Russia is setting conditions for a wider attack in the direction of Vuhledar. 7. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. In our assessment, the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs will continue to encourage escalation. 8. The disjointed response to Russian aggression by Ukraine's allies continues to embolden Moscow, leading to the most serious airspace violation of a NATO country since Russia expanded its war of aggression on February the 24th, 2022. Inaction by the United States and the excessively risk-averse rules of engagement forced on the NATO alliance are creating an environment ripe for a serious international incident. 9. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and the situation is more serious, especially at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, than what the International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting. Russia targeted civilian objects in Odesa, Kharkiv and Kherson. Security camera video showed a Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile launched from Crimea with a fragmentation warhead exploded over the waterfront of Odesa. The missile targeted Kivallov's estate, also known as the Harry Potter Castle, severely damaging the building, which is also the reception house of the International Humanitarian University. Shrapnel and debris sprayed the coastal walkway and parks around the estate, killing 5 and wounding 31. 24 people are hospitalized, with 4 in intensive care. The wounded include 2 children, with a 4-year-old in very critical condition, and a pregnant woman. A video showed that one victim, a woman, had their back pierced by shrapnel. She died on the way to the hospital from internal injuries. Former head of the Odesa Law Academy and former People's Deputy Sergei Kivalov is the owner of the self-named estate and is among the severely wounded. He was the head of the Central Committee when Viktor Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine and received a state award from autocrat Vladimir Putin in 2013. It was reported that he is expected to survive, but will have a long recovery. Firefighting efforts took hours, and the interior of the building is likely a total loss. There was no mention of the attack at the United Nations press briefing. The VKS, also known as the Russian Aerospace Forces, repeatedly bombed the city of Kharkiv using Fab 500 UMPK glide bombs. One apartment building was hit, injuring one person who is in hospital. The offices of the NGO Rescue Animals of Kharkiv were also hit, but there were no reports if any shelter animals killed or wounded. The settlement of Kupiansk-Uzlovy was also bombed, destroying a home and wounding a pensioner. Russian shelling of Free Kherson Oblast killed a pensioner in the village of Kizomys and wounded a second person. 17 villages, settlements and the cities of Kherson and Berislav were targeted. Here is today's action report. With Russia launching another 93 attacks, the available data supports that the Spring-Summer 2024 offensive has started. The 10-day moving average has reached 97 attacks a day, which is equal to the peak of the Avdiivka offensive on December 14, 2023, and toward the end of the Russian winter offensive in March 2023. The number of attacks started to climb dramatically on April 20th, the same day the United States House of Representatives passed the 7-month delayed military aid package to Ukraine. In our assessment, this was not a coincidence. The next 4 to 6 weeks for Ukrainian forces will be extremely difficult. Still, we remain moderately confident that Russian gains can be contained to tactical advances. The biggest danger for a Russian breakout continues to be in the direction of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. With the loss of the Durna River defensive line, Ukrainian commanders likely believe the Vovcha River and connected reservoirs are the next defensible point. The Vovcha River basin runs from occupied Solovyovo to Novopokrovsk to Novoselivka Persha to Mezhove and the ridges on the west side of the reservoirs north of Karlivka. We map this out in our almost daily situation report, and information on how to become a subscriber is in the podcast description. Here is the problem. Russian forces have already flanked the Vovcha River basin north of Solovyovo. The next viable natural defensive terrain is at Progress and Vovcha on the T511 highway, and then south to Mezhove. Russian forces could attempt to advance toward Malinivka and sever the Ukrainian ground line of communication, that's a G-Loka supply line, to Kostiantynivka, but in our assessment this would create a significant salient with vulnerable flanks. The second area of concern is at Krasnogorivka, which would force Ukraine to withdraw from Nevelske, setting conditions for Russia to advance on the southern flank of the Vodyana River. We can't rule out a Russian attempt to advance past Keramik and try to put Toretsk and New York into salient, but the terrain is less favorable, and Russia is making far fewer mistakes compared to a year ago. Long-time listeners might remember that in April 2023 we expressed concern that Russian glide bombs would be an increasing problem for Ukrainian forces if robust short-range air defense, also called SHORAD, couldn't be maintained. Our readers and listeners have made it clear in recent feedback that they miss bold assessment. So here is the brutal truth, because the truth matters. If Ukraine cannot re-establish air parity, its ground forces will be unable to stop the ongoing Russian advances. While other systemic problems need to be addressed, air defense is the most critical mid- and long-term issue. As one Ukrainian soldier explained, you can hide in a basement from a Fab 250 or Fab 500 bomb, but you need deep bunkers to survive a strike from Fab 1500. Not to leave you on a sour note, the world will know when significant US aid has reached the front. The VKS has been operating with impunity at low altitudes on the line of conflict, conducting dozens of sorties a day. In the next 3 to 5 weeks, the VKS is going to have a very bad day, and uncontested close air support missions will end. This won't establish air parity, but it will reduce the indiscriminate airstrikes on the line of conflict. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. This is a good time to open up our war map. There is a link in the podcast description. Ready? In the Kupiansk area of operation, OREO, house-to-house fighting was ongoing in the village of Kislivka, where Russian forces have made marginal gains. In the Svatovo AO, Russian forces are attempting to take advantage of small gains made over the weekend northeast of Stelmachivka, where mutual fighting was reported. There was more clarity to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, report on Sunday about fighting in the areas of Kopanki and Novosergiyevka. Attacks near the latter were repulsed and are several kilometers east of the village. Russian attacks near the hamlets of Novoyegorivka and Tverdokhlibove also ended without success. In the Kremenna AO, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance in the direction of Nevska. More intense fighting restarted east of Terny and Torske. GSAFU reported fighting was ongoing south of Zarichne. This is 8 to 11 kilometers west of the known line of conflict, and there have been no claims of a breakthrough in the direction of Liman. With the available intelligence, we assess the assault was likely a Russian sabotage and reconnaissance unit, and not indicative of a larger attack or condition setting. Near Kremenna, mutual fighting was reported south of Dibrova, with no change in the situation. In the Siversk AO of Luhansk Oblast, fighting continued east and southeast of Bilogorivka. An Italian Puma armored fighting vehicle with the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed west of the settlement. Italy had not previously announced it had provided the AFVs. South of Bilogorivka, Russian forces maintained their attacks in the direction of Verkhnyokamyansk from Zolotarivka without success. Moving to the Donbass, in northeastern Donetsk Oblast, fighting restarted in the Soledar AO. Russian forces restarted attempts to advance in the direction of Rozdolivka, suffered losses and retreated to their previous defensive line. In the Kostantinivka AO, intense fighting continued with no change in the situation. Russian attempts to advance into the Novy microdistrict Chasiv Yar and improve their positions in Ivanivske were unsuccessful. Between Ivanivske and Kryshivka, a Russian BMP infantry fighting vehicle was captured by Ukrainian forces, further confirming recent advances near both settlements. GSAFU reported fighting continued southeast of Andriivka, with no change in the situation. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces advanced further on the T511 highway in the direction of Progress in the Avdiivka AO. The situation remains extremely difficult for Ukrainian forces, who have not stabilized their defensive lines and will likely continue their fighting withdrawal. Fighting continued in Novokolonove and Keramik. Ukrainian forces continued to hold 10 to 20% of Ocheretine, with Russian forces continuing their attempts to advance toward Arkhangelsk. Russian troops did make gains in the direction of Novo-Alexandrivka, stretching the northern flank of the advance to 6 kilometers. In our assessment, Russian troops likely can't advance much further than Novo-Alexandrivka in the short term without establishing better G-locks. Both combatants are in a race. Russia to advance as far as possible, and Ukraine's allies to get more artillery shells to the front. Russian attempts to advance on Sokil from the north and from Solovyovo were unsuccessful. Ukrainian forces also repulsed Russian attacks in the direction of Novopokrovsk. Russian attempts to advance further west from Semenivka were unsuccessful, while Ukrainian forces attacked Russian positions near Orlivka. Russian troops paused in the eastern part of Netailove and restarted their attempts to advance in the direction of Nevelske from Pervomaiska. Intense fighting also continued in the Vuhledar AO. Russian troops continued their attacks south of the refractory factory in Krasnogorivka, while trying to advance further west in an attempt to flank Ukrainian troops. Russian forces made additional gains on the southeastern and eastern outskirts of the settlement, and the line of conflict was adjusted. To the southwest, fighting continued east of Georgievka with no change in the situation. Russian forces were pushed out of Paraskoviivka, and the Ukrainian 79th Brigade is working on stabilizing their new defensive lines on the western edge of Novomykhailivka. The 72nd Brigade was also successful, making marginal gains east of Vodane. Russian forces continued to lock Ukrainian troops in place in the Staromlynivka AO, maintaining attacks southeast of Urozhaine and west of Staromayorske, with no change in the situation. Russian troops also attempted to advance from Priyutne on the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia Oblast's administrative border in the direction of Novodarivka without success. In the Orikhiv AO of Zaporizhzhia Oblast, fighting continued in, south and west of Robotine, which has become a no-man's land. A squad of Russian troops briefly reached the northern part of the settlement and raised a flag for a picture report. Ukrainian forces eliminated the squad and removed the flag. Russia was accused of using the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant training center to hold drone training hosted by Archangel. The Russian organization Archangel maintains 3 training bases in the occupied territories. Newly trained Russian drone operators are reportedly tested striking the Nikopol rayon of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Electronic warfare systems used by Ukraine sometimes interfere with the attacks, with drones falling in the Dnipro River and near ZNPP. In the Kherson AO, Russian forces launched a single attack on Ukrainian positions in Krynki, suffered losses and retreated. Russian forces reportedly heavily shelled Nestriga Island and attempted an amphibious landing. Ukrainian forces liberated the island in the Dnipro River Delta over the weekend. The Polish blockade of Ukrainian border checkpoints ended, with traffic flowing at Rava Ruska. The blockades started on November the 6th and were backed by the pro-Kremlin Confederate and law and order parties of Poland. At least 2 organizers were identified as pro-Russian political operatives. Protesters ended their blockades at all but Rava Ruska on April the 20th, the same day the US House of Representatives passed an aid package for Ukraine. An amazing coincidence. The transit of Ukrainian grain by truck remains blocked, but all other traffic is unrestricted.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. The United Nations released a 32-page report concluding that Russia used a North Korean-provided KN-23 short-range ballistic missile to attack Kharkiv on January the 2nd. Debris analysis confirmed the source of the missile, and the missile was determined to have been launched, quote, from the territory of the Russian Federation. Ukrainian officials said that their allies were not the reason for the delay in deploying F-16s and cited the need to build deep underground bunkers to shelter the aircraft, improving airfields, and ongoing pilot training as the main barriers. The first F-16s appear to be on track to start operations in June or July. The Ministers of Foreign Affairs for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia accused Russia of blocking GPS signals in their nations and the Baltic Sea, something Moscow denies. Over 46,000 commercial flights from Germany to Finland have been impacted, along with hundreds of merchant ships. Margus Tsahkna, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, accused Russia of conducting hybrid warfare, quote, whether it is cyber attacks or whether it is a completely deliberate action in terms of jamming the GPS signal. Russia knows very well that the interference they are causing is very dangerous for our air traffic and specifically is also in breach of international conventions to which Russia is a party." Unquote. GPS jamming on its own is not considered an act of war by the NATO Alliance Charter. Finnair suspended commercial service to Tartu, Estonia, after flights on April the 25th and the 26th were forced to return to Helsinki. Flights are cancelled through May the 31st, while Estonia adds the capability to land at the airport without GPS. The US Congress received a briefing that the effectiveness of 155mm GPS-guided Excalibur shells dropped from 70% to 6% over 6 weeks due to Russian electronic warfare. The briefing concluded that the issue isn't unsolvable, but as written, the existing software is not easily updated. Quote, "The lack of adaptability is not an inherent property of software, but rather a consequence of how we are choosing to manage it." The Kyiv-based Center for Defense Strategies reported on April the 28th that the armed forces of Ukraine had suspended the use of the GLSDB due to GPS interference. On Monday, a Boeing spokesperson refused to confirm that the weapon system Ukraine stopped using is GLSDB, but said that, quote, "spiral capability improvements were being made on a guided weapon system, which is to say the software is being updated." The General Secretary of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, was in Kyiv on an unannounced visit. During a joint press conference with President Volodymyr Zelensky, Stoltenberg said that it's not too late for Ukraine to regain the advantage on the battlefield, but admitted that the delays in US aid had serious consequences on the front. During the meeting, Zelensky was officially invited to the NATO-Washington summit, which starts on July the 9th. Additionally, the next meeting of the Ukraine-NATO Council will be in Brussels on May the 16th. Canada announced it was providing Ukraine with 50 ACSV Super Bison infantry fighting vehicles, which are supported by a crew of 3 and can carry 8 dismounts. The Super Bison is heavily mine-resistant and is equipped with an M242 Bushmaster 25mm chain gun. Spain will provide a small number of PAC-2 interceptors for the Patriot air defense system. Germany announced the shipment of a military aid package to Ukraine. The list of items included is long, and more information is available in our situation report. Most importantly, it includes a Skynex air defense system, a TRML-4D radar, missiles for the Iris-T air defense system, and ammunition for the Gepard mobile SHORAD system. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.